My name is Falco Vinius. I am or was a field healer of the Imperial Legion. My job was sutures and poultices. My world was the clean bite of a bone saw against shattered limbs and the precise application of a bandage to a sword cut. I fixed men. I took the damage done by steel and iron and I made it right, or as right as it could be. I brought order to the chaos of the battlefield. That was my trade. That was the scope of it. Above me, a single beam of gray light cut through the gloom, illuminating the swirling motes of ash. It came through a hole in what used to be the floor of a tavern. I remembered the smell of mead and roasting meat from this morning. Now the air tasted of char and something greasy that I knew was human fat. The ringing in my ears was a dull hum, the memory of a sound so loud it had almost turned my bones to jelly. A roar, not the roar of a man or a beast I had ever known. It was the sound of a mountain falling, of the sky itself tearing open. I sat up, my body protested. A sharp pain lanced through my left side. I ran a hand over my ribs, feeling for the telltale crunch of a break. Just bruised. My training was automatic. Assess the damage, triage, treat. I was the only patient. The irony was a bitter stone in my throat. Hundreds of people had been in Helgen. Legionaries, storm-cloaked prisoners, townspeople. Where were their screams? The silence was the real injury. It was a wound no potion could close. I saw General Tullius this morning, his face like a mask of imperial certainty. He was there to watch Ulfric Stormcloak die. He was there to put an end to a rebellion and restore order. I wondered if the general was still certain about anything. I wondered if he was even still alive. I had seen Legate Ricca trying to rally the archers on the wall. Her voice, usually so sharp and clear, had been swallowed by the wind and the fire. My kit was a tragedy. A few rolls of linen bandages were intact but stained with soot. My mortar and pestle were shattered. My surgical knives were scattered in the dirt. I found my bone saw, its teeth clogged with splinters of wood from the floorboards. I had used it yesterday to amputate a legionary's leg after a training accident. A clean, simple job. The man would live. He probably thanked the divines for his luck. He was probably dead now. I wondered if it was better to die whole or to die in pieces. It was not a thought a healer should have. I crawled towards the beam of light, my boots crunching on broken pottery. The cellar was surprisingly intact. Barrels of ale were piled against one wall, some of them split and leaking. The smell of stale drink mingled with the smoke. It was a tomb. I was the last living thing in it. I pushed myself up, using a collapsed beam for support, and peered through the hole. Helgen was gone. What I could see was not a town. It was a ruin. The buildings were skeletal frames of blackened timber, still smoking. The sky was a uniform, miserable, gray, choked with ash. There was no movement, no birds, no people, no wind. Just the dead stillness of a fresh grave. My loneliest job had found its loneliest moment. I was a healer with no one left to heal, standing in the wreckage of a world I could not fix. This morning, the air had been sharp with the promise of a cold Skyrim day. I had been checking my inventory. 12 potions of minor healing, 6 of plentiful healing, 20 rolls of clean linen bandages, a full pouch of frost miriam for poultices, another of lavender for calming drafts. Order. Everything had its place. Everything was accounted for. My station was set up near the main gate, a small tent with a cot and a table for my instruments. It was clean. I insisted on it. Infection was a greater killer than any Stormcloak axe, I told the recruits. They would laugh, but they listened. They knew my work. Kemal, a red guard from Sentinel, had brought me a cup of spiced wine. He was a scout, lean and quick, and he hated the cold. He blew on his hands. Another glorious day in this frozen wasteland, Falco. You think the general will get this over with quickly? I want to be back in the barracks by lunch. The general does not consult me on his schedule, Kamal, I told him, not looking up from my ledger. And this is not a wasteland. It is a posting. Do your duty. Duty is cold, he muttered, but he was smiling. At least the traitor gets what is coming to him. I saw them bring him in. Ulfric Stormcloak, he doesn't look like much. Just another Nord with a dirty beard. He is a man. And when this is over, there will be other men, wounded men, who will need me to do my duty, so let me do it. He clapped me on the shoulder. Always the professional. You would patch up a Draugr if it paid you in septums. Draugr do not carry coin, I said, and their flesh is too brittle for sutures. The joke was old, but it was familiar. It was part of the rhythm of our lives. Here, we were soldiers in a foreign land, holding a line against a rebellion we did not fully understand. We relied on these small routines, these repeated conversations, to keep the strangeness at bay. We talked about the food, the weather, the Nords, and their incomprehensible gods. We did not talk about why we were here or the fact that the people outside the walls hated us for it. That was officer talk. Our job was to follow orders and stay alive. Mine was to help with the second part. I watched the prisoners being led towards the chopping block. Ulfric Stormcloak walked with a straight back, his eyes fixed ahead. He was gagged, a precaution I thought was excessive until later. With him was Ralof, one of his housecarls, and a few others. They were defiant. I felt a grudging respect for that. My job was to see them as bodies, potential sources of injury to the men under my care. If the crowd rioted, if the prisoners broke free, there would be work for me to do. I prepared for it. My knives were sharp, my bandages ready. I anticipated sword wounds, arrow piercings, maybe a broken bone from a thrown rock. I was prepared for a riot. Legate Rika walked past my tent, her armor immaculate, her red hair a slash of color against the gray stone of the keep. She gave me a sharp nod. Healer, be ready. The Jarl of Windhelm has a loud voice. His followers might be inspired to do something foolish. I am always ready, Legate, I replied. She paused. Good. We need every man to be at his best today. The Empire is watching. Her words were meant to inspire confidence. They did. The Legion was a machine. It was built for moments like this. Every part had its function. The soldiers formed a perimeter. The archers manned the walls. The executioner checked his axe. I stood by my medical supplies. Everything was under control. I could hear the blacksmith, a local man named Alvor, I think, working at his forge in the town proper. The rhythmic ring of his hammer on steel was a comforting sound. It was the sound of a normal day. A man doing his job. A town living its life. Children were shouting in a game of tag near the inn. The smell of baking bread drifted over the wall from the tavern. It was all so painfully ordinary. I remember thinking that it was a good day for an execution. The sky was clear, the air was still, a clean end to a messy rebellion. My focus was on the task ahead. I did not think about the politics of it. Was Ulfric a patriot or a traitor? It was not my place to decide. My place was here with my tools, waiting to mend what was broken. I saw Hadvar, a young Nord who had grown up in the area, talking to one of the prisoners. I could not hear what they were saying, but Hadvar's face was troubled. He believed in the Empire, but he was a Nord. This day was tearing him in two. I felt a flicker of sympathy. It was easier for me. I was just an Imperial from Cheydinhal. My only loyalty was to the red diamond on my uniform and the men who wore it with me. I checked the straps on my kit one last time. I ran a thumb over the edge of a clean scalpel. I was ready for the blood. I was trained for it. I knew how to read the flow, how to stanch it, how to clean the wound it left behind. Blood was just a fluid, pain was just a signal, death was just a failure of my craft. I was a mechanic of the human body, that was all. I was confident, I was prepared, I had no idea what was coming. I was prepared for men with axes, not for a god falling out of the sky. The day continued to unfold according to the Imperial schedule. The priestess of RK began her rites, her voice a low drone against the nervous silence of the crowd. General Tullius stood with his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with an air of detached impatience. He wanted this done. He wanted to move on to the next problem. The Stormcloak Rebellion was a distraction from the real threat, the Thalmor. I had heard him say as much to Legate Rika. To him, this was provincial politics, a messy piece of business to be concluded as efficiently as possible. Then came the sound. At first it was nothing, a distant rumble like a rock slide high on the throat of the world. A few soldiers glanced up at the mountain, then went back to watching the prisoners. I dismissed it myself. Skyrim was a land of crumbling peaks and sudden avalanches. It was background noise, but the sound did not fade. It grew. It became a deep, resonant roar that vibrated in my chest. It was not the sound of falling rock. It was alive. Kamal appeared at my side, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "What in oblivion is that?" "Stay calm, soldier," I muttered, my eyes scanning the crowd for signs of panic. "It is probably nothing." It was not nothing. The roar intensified, echoing off the mountainsides until it seemed to be coming from every direction at once. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The horses tethered near the gate began to scream, their eyes wide with terror. People in the crowd were pointing at the sky now, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. I looked up. A shadow fell over us. It was not the shadow of a cloud. It was sharp-edged, moving with impossible speed. It blotted out the sun for a heartbeat, and in that moment of cold darkness, the world changed. Something vast and black swooped over Helgen. I caught a glimpse of scales like obsidian, of wings larger than the sails of a ship. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was a story, a myth, a creature from a child's tale. It was not real. "What is it?" Kamal breathed, his voice tight with awe and terror. I had no answer. My professional mind, the part of me that categorized and analyzed, was useless. There was no entry in my medical texts for this. This was not a wound the Legion could suffer. This was an event outside of reason. I looked to Legate Rika. Her face was ashen. She was shouting orders, but I could not hear them over the roar that now filled the world. "Archers! Archers, now!" The creature landed on the main watchtower. The stone crumbled under its weight. It was a dragon. The word felt like a heresy in my mind. Dragons were gone. They were legends, carvings on ancient walls. But this thing was real. It was a physical presence of impossible scale and malice. It turned its head and I saw its eyes. They were ancient, intelligent, and filled with a burning hatred. Then it spoke. Or rather, it shouted. The sound that came from its throat was not just a roar. It was a word in a language that felt like it was made of thunder and tearing stone. "Fuss!" The air itself seemed to buckle. The top of the tower exploded outwards, sending stone and men flying. I saw a soldier, a man I had shared a drink with last night, simply disintegrate in the wave of force. He did not fall. He just came apart. The ordered world of the Imperial Legion shattered. The machine broke. The perimeter dissolved into a screaming mob. Soldiers and civilians ran in every direction, their faces blank with a terror I had never witnessed. This was not the fear of battle. This was the fear of the unknown, of a power that did not belong in our world. My training, the endless drills and memorized procedures took over. I dropped to one knee behind a stack of crates, pulling my helmet down tight. My hand went to my healer kit, an absurdly small and fragile thing in the face of this catastrophe. Triage. I had to think. What were the injuries? Crushing wounds from falling debris, lacerations, broken bones. These were things I could handle. I could bring order to this. I had to. It was my job. The dragon inhaled. Its throat glowed with an orange light like a forge being brought to temperature. I knew with a certainty that froze the blood in my veins what was coming next. I screamed at Kamal, who was standing paralyzed in the open. "Get down! Get down now!" But he did not hear me. He was just staring, his sword hanging limp in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief. He was a brave man, a good scout. He had faced down saber cats and forsworn berserkers, but he was not prepared for this. None of us were. We were soldiers trained to fight men. We were not heroes from a forgotten age. Fire erupted from the dragon's mouth. It was not a stream of flame. It was a wave, a tidal wave of liquid heat that washed over the courtyard. It hit the spot where Kamal had been standing. He vanished. There was no scream. There was just a flash of incandescent light, and then he was gone. The air smelled like burnt leather and cooked meat. I felt the heat on my face, a searing blast that blistered my skin. I pressed myself against the ground, making myself as small as possible. The fire roared over my head, the sound of 1,000 blacksmith forges. The crates I was hiding behind began to smoke, then burst into flame. I had to move. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting impulses. The healer in me screamed to run towards the wounded. The soldier screamed to find cover and regroup. But the man, the small, terrified core of Falco Vinius, screamed only to survive. For the first time in my career, the man won. Duty was a concept for a world that made sense. This world no longer made sense. I scrambled away from the burning crates, keeping low to the ground. The air was thick with smoke and the screams of the dying. A woman ran past me, her clothes on fire. She was a living torch. There was nothing I could do for her. I had a potion that could mend flesh, but I had nothing that could put out a soul that was burning. I averted my eyes. I was a healer, and I was averting my eyes from the wounded. The shame of it was a physical blow. It hurt more than the heat. The dragon took to the air again, circling the town like a hawk over a field of mice. Its roars were punctuated by the crash of collapsing buildings. It was not just attacking. It was dismantling Helgen stone by stone. I saw the keep, the symbol of imperial authority, its roof engulfed in flames. I needed to get to the wounded. I needed to do my job. I saw a legionary lying near the gate, his leg trapped under a fallen beam. He was alive, screaming for his mother. I started crawling towards him. This I could fix. A crushed leg. I had my saw. I had my bandages. I could save him. The dragon landed again, this time right in the middle of the main road. Its massive body blocked the only way out. It turned its head and looked directly at me. I froze. Those eyes. They were not the eyes of a dumb beast. They saw me. They saw my pathetic little bag of remedies, my foolish attempt to impose order on its magnificent chaos. It seemed to amuse the creature. A low rumble started in its chest, a sound like grinding stones. It was laughing. Then another shout. "Yol!" Fire, a concentrated jet of it, not a wave. It struck the ground in front of me, turning the cobblestones to molten slag. The heat was unbearable. My uniform started to smolder. The soldier I had been trying to reach was gone, consumed by the blast. The beam that had pinned him was now a glowing ember. I ran. All thought of duty, of triage, of healing was gone. It was burned out of me. I was an animal fleeing a predator. I ran without direction, stumbling over bodies and debris. The ordered grid of the town had become a maze of fire and death. I saw things I could not comprehend. A horse, still standing but completely charred like a statue made of charcoal. A Stormcloak prisoner and a Legion guard dead side by side, their petty war rendered meaningless. I ducked into an alleyway trying to catch my breath. The air was poison. Every inhalation was a lungful of smoke and ash. My eyes were streaming. I was blind, deafened, and utterly alone. I could hear the dragon's wings, a terrifying rhythmic whoosh that sounded like the world's own heartbeat. A building beside me groaned, the sound of tortured wood and stone. The wall began to buckle outwards. I threw myself forward, away from the collapsing structure. I landed hard on the street, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I looked back to see the entire tavern collapse into a pile of rubble and flame. I had to get inside. I had to get underground. The open air was a killing field. I saw the door to a house hanging open, its wood splintered. I scrambled inside. The house was empty, its occupants either fled or dead. The air was still thick with smoke, but it was better than the inferno outside. The sounds were slightly muffled. I could hear the dragon on the roof. The scrape of its claws on the wooden shingles was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It was hunting. It was clearing the town, methodically, efficiently. A deep thud shook the entire house. It had landed on the roof. The timbers above me began to crack. Dust and splinters rained down. I dove behind a large wooden table just as the roof gave way. Fire and darkness. A roar that was right on top of me. I felt the floorboards beneath me splinter and break. And then I was falling. I fell into the blackness of the cellar, the roar of the dragon and the crash of the collapsing house, the last things I heard before the world went silent. It was the silence I woke up to, the silence that was now my whole world, and so I found myself in the aftermath, a lone survivor in a buried tomb, the healer who had failed to heal anyone, the soldier who had run. My hands shook. I was trained to have steady hands. They were the most important tool of my trade. A tremor could mean a slipped knife, a botched suture, a life lost. Now they trembled uncontrollably. I clenched them into fists, trying to force them into submission. It did not work. The shaking was not in my muscles. It was deeper. It was in my soul. I am not sure I am telling you this part right. It is hard to find the words for the moment your world breaks. I spent what felt like hours in that cellar, just listening to the silence. Sometimes the wind would shift and I would hear the groan of a burnt timber settling. Once I thought I heard a voice, a faint cry for help. I held my breath, straining to hear it again. But there was nothing. It was just the wind, playing tricks on a mind that was desperate for any sign of life. Or maybe it was a ghost. Helgen was full of them now. Eventually, the fear gave way to a dull, grinding emptiness. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind an exhaustion that was bone deep. I had to get out. I could not die in this hole. It was not a question of survival, it was a refusal. I would not let this place be my grave. Climbing out of the cellar was a clumsy, painful affair. I used the collapsed beams as a ladder, my bruised ribs screaming with every movement. When my head finally broke the surface, I was met with the same gray, silent world I had seen through the crack in the floor. But now I was in it. I was part of the wreckage. I stood in the ruins of the tavern, the ash up to my ankles. The scale of the destruction was absolute. Not a single building was untouched. The stone keep was a blackened husk. The walls were breached in a dozen places. The chopping block where Ulfric's Stormcloak was supposed to die was split in two, as if by a bolt of lightning. I started to walk. My footsteps were the only sound, a soft crunching in the thick layer of soot that covered everything. I walked towards the gate, towards my medical station. I did not know why. There was nothing left to do there. It was just an instinct. A homing pigeon returning to a roost that no longer existed. I passed bodies. They were not bodies in the way I was used to. My work had been with the wounded, the dying. People who still had names and faces, these were things. charred shapes, barely recognizable as human. Some were frozen in place, their hands raised as if to ward off the flames that had consumed them. Legionaries, stormcloaks, villagers, the dragon had been indiscriminate in its slaughter. It had not cared about our politics, our allegiances. We were all just flammable meat. I found Kamal, or what I thought was Kamal. It was a pile of melted steel and blackened bone lying in the spot where he had been standing. The heat had fused his armor into a single twisted lump. There was nothing of the man left, nothing of the quick smile, the endless complaints about the cold. Just this ugly monument to his end. I stood there for a long time, watching it. I did not feel grief. I did not feel anything. I was a hollowed-out thing, emptied of all emotion. My professional detachment had become my entire being. I was an observer of a failed procedure. My medical tent was gone, not just burned, but completely obliterated. A few of my tools were scattered in the ash. I found a single unbroken vial of healing potion. The red liquid inside seemed to mock me. I picked it up. It felt warm, almost alive. I thought about drinking it, though I was not seriously injured. I thought maybe it could heal the wound inside me, the one that was not bleeding. But I knew it could not. This was not a hurt that magic could fix. I walked to the center of the ruined courtyard. The air was beginning to clear. A light snow began to fall, each flake landing on the black ground and vanishing instantly. It was a gentle, indifferent cleansing. In a few days, the snow would cover the bodies in the wreckage. Helgen would be a white mound, a quiet grave. The world would move on. The Empire and the Stormcloaks would go back to killing each other over their kings and their gods. This day would become a story, a legend. The day a dragon burned a town to the ground. And I would be a part of that story. The healer who survived, the one who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. They would ask me what it was like. They would want details. They would want to know how to fight it, how to kill it. And I would have no answers. I am a healer. My purpose is to mend. But some things cannot be mended. Some wounds are too deep. Some fires burn too hot. You cannot put a bandage on a memory. You cannot set the bones of a broken world. My skills were for a smaller, more human kind of violence. My trade was for a world where men killed men with swords and axes. That world was gone. A new one had begun, a world of gods and monsters. I had no place in it. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. They were empty. I knelt in the center of what was once a town. I let the snow fall on my face. It felt clean. I reached down, my fingers sinking into the thick layer of ash and soot that covered the stone. It was still warm. I scooped up a handful. It was soft, lighter than I expected. It was made of wood and cloth and stone and people. It was everything that Helgen had been, reduced to its simplest form. This was the end result of the dragon's work. This was what was left when the shouting and the burning were done. I stood and turned my back on the ruin. There was nothing left for me here. My job was over. The loneliest job in the Empire had finally ended, not with a victory or a defeat, but with a quiet handful of dust. The work of a healer is to preserve life. All I had preserved was my own, and I was not sure why. I am not sure it was a good thing. A good healer would have died with his patients. I was still alive. That was the only diagnosis I had left. I started walking towards the road that led to Riverwood. I did not know what I would do when I got there. I did not know what I would say. I was a man without a purpose, a healer without a patient, a soldier without a legion. I was just a survivor. And that felt like the most useless thing of all. The snow was falling faster now, thick white flakes against the black and gray of the world. It was starting to cover the bodies. It was making everything clean again. I did not look back. There was nothing to see but endings. I needed to find a beginning. I did not know if such a thing still existed. I held the vial of healing potion in my hand. It was the last piece of my old life, the last symbol of my trade. I thought about throwing it away, leaving it behind with the rest of the wreckage. But I could not. It was a part of me, a useless part maybe, a broken part, but it was mine. I put it in my pouch and kept walking. My name is Falco Vinius. I used to be a healer. I do not know what I am now. The silence followed me down the road. It was a heavy thing, a cloak made of ash and memory. I had spent my life fighting against silence. I had filled it with the sounds of my work, the scrape of a knife, the snap of a bandage, the quiet reassurances I gave to wounded men. Now I had nothing to say. There were no words for this. There was only the crunch of my boots in the fresh snow and the quiet, steady beat of my own heart, a stubborn engine in a world of ghosts. I found the first sign of life a mile down the road. A wolf, its fur the color of dirty snow, was watching me from a ridge. It did not growl. It just watched, its yellow eyes ancient and knowing. It had seen the fire in the sky. It had smelled the death on the wind. It knew the world had changed. We were two survivors, the wolf and I, regarding each other across a landscape of ruin. Then it turned and melted back into the trees. It had a place to go. I did not. I kept walking. Each step was a choice. I could lie down in the snow and let the cold take me. It would be an easy death, a quiet end to a story that no longer made sense. But I did not. Some stubborn part of me, the part that insisted on clean bandages and sharp knives, refused to quit. It was not hope. Hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. It was just procedure. The procedure of living. You put one foot in front of the other, you breathe in, you breathe out, you keep moving until you can no longer move. Ahead, through the swirling snow, I saw a flicker of light, a torch, a campfire. Another survivor, or something else? A new danger in a world that was full of them. The old Falco, the Legion healer, would have approached with caution, his hand on his dagger, his mind assessing the threat. But I was not him anymore. I just walked towards the light. I was too tired to be cautious. I was too empty to be afraid. Whatever was there, I would face it. My bag was empty of potions, and my heart was empty of fear. There was a strange freedom in that, the freedom of a man who has already lost everything. The loneliest job in the Empire was done. A new one, the job of living with what I had seen, was just beginning, and I had no idea how to do it. I touched the ash on my uniform. It came away on my fingers, a gray smear. It did not feel real. None of this felt real. I let the soot fall from my hand, watching it dust the clean white snow. Nothing stays clean for long. That was the first lesson of my trade. I supposed it was still true.